Do I sound okay?
So, welcome back, everybody. James Bartley is back, as you can see, and we are going to talk about his personal abduction experiences. And yeah, James, welcome. And
You, Judith, pleased to be here.
and you just came back from a conference. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, it's the Full Disclosure Now conference. I think it's the second year they've had it. Brian Singh is the conference promoter. Great guy, and he's brought in a lot of people, including a Frenchman, Jean-Charles Moyen, who told a fantastic story, absolutely believable, about his alien abduction experiences and his involvement with the secret space program. Because apparently the French were involved as well as some of the other European countries that are part of the EU. They also have involvement in these off-world programs. So he came on right before I did, so I sat and watched his whole lecture. He was fantastic, and there were a number of other people there that have had off-world secret space program type experiences. And what was interesting was there was at least two, maybe three people that I recognized from somewhere. And one of them, I'm going to have him on my show soon, David Purcell. He likewise recognized me. He said, "You were part of these programs off world." I go, "Well, you look very familiar to me." And then excuse me, I'm just battling the remnants of a bug.
Hmm.
And I can share more about it later, but he shared like little known nuances about me and my personality and some of the things I get up to, which he couldn't have known about. So and the fact that I recognized him from somewhere, I never forget a face. So I recognized him somewhere. So that was kind of confirmation. But others have told me of my involvement in the off-world programs, and I have memories too of some of these experiences. So, and also it was great meeting all these people I've known for a long time on Facebook or social media, but never met them in person. A lot of people that I've been a guest on their show, they've been a guest on my show, and finally get to meet in real life. And it was a great location, St. Petersburg, Florida, at the Hilton Serrata Resort right on the beach. It was a great time. So yeah, I spent the whole week there. It was wonderful.
Hmm. Yeah, great. So when it comes to your own experiences, can you recall what approximately what your first encounter was and how that felt?
Well, the first time I had an ET encounter that I'm aware of was I was about four and a half, maybe five, but more likely about 4.5 years old in Corpus Christi, Texas. My dad was stationed at Naval Air Station Corpus Christi. He was in the Navy at the time, and it was dusk. I was in my bedroom playing, and my mom was in the living room ironing my dad's Navy uniform. The uniform she was ironing was they call it navy blue, but to me it looks black. It's like a black enlisted seaman's uniform. So that told me it was either the autumn or the winter when this occurred, because uh, in the spring and summer, the enlisted personnel, depending on the uniform of the day, they wear an all white uniform. But in autumn and winter, they wear a like a black, looks like a black uniform to me. So she was ironing my dad's black uniform. So it was autumn or winter, 1968, 69, something like that. And I was alone in my bedroom playing, and there was no artificial light on. We had Venetian blinds in that bedroom, and the slats were partially open, so I could see the waning sunlight coming in because it was dusk. It was getting late in the day, and I distinctly remember even seeing dust motes hanging, floating from visible from the rays of the sun coming in through the Venetian blinds. And then I felt the presence, and I turned, and I saw this small being, brown, uh, not really a round head, kind of like oval, and It was suspended. It was floating in the air. Now, I was a small child, and I was small in stature too. I was very, for a long time, I was a very small child, and even going into high school, I was still a small guy. So, as a young boy, I was already small to begin with, and this being was floating in the air, and I was looking up at it, and then it started talking to me, and it was telling me that I'm going to be doing something important in the future. I have some kind of destiny to fulfill, some real important work to do. But I wasn't interested in any of that. I was just being very territorial, very possessive. This is my bedroom. These are my toys. This is my stuff. I don't want you here. So I told the entity to leave, and they just kept talking to me. And then what happened was I just got so fed up because the being wouldn't leave. I said, "Well, I'm going to tell my mom." And it said, "Go ahead. She won't see me." Right. So I left the room. I went to my mom. She was ironing her clothes, my dad's clothes. And I said, "Mom, there's a little man in my room. There's a little man in my room." And she wasn't having a bar of it. She was just ironing my dad's uniform. And I was insistent, Mom, there's a little man in my room. Finally, I grabbed her by the elbow and I dragged her to my room. I opened up the door, nothing. The
Mm,
being was gone. My mom turned around, stormed off. She was angry, right? I went back in, closed the door, and then the being reappeared and looked at me, and then it disappeared. So for a long time afterwards, I told anyone who would listen about this little man that I saw, a little gray man. He wasn't really gray; it was more brown, but because there was no artificial light, it was very dim in the room. To me, he looked gray, but with the benefit of hindsight, he was more brown. And I told anyone who would listen about this encounter I had. And back then, like late 60s, early 70s, nobody laughed about these things, at least the kids my age, who were much more open minded. And inexplicably, I remember distinctly telling people about it when I was in the second grade. That would have been about mm, 71, 72 time frame, maybe earlier. And like I said, none of my friends thought it was crazy or silly. And then mysteriously, I just forgot all about it. It was just gone from my conscious memory, right? And I understood later this is something that happens sometimes. So fast forward decades down the track, I just come back from Germany where I was doing a language study program, and I had a series of UFO experiences when I came back to San Jose, California, culminating in a full blown abduction encounter with three reptilian grays. These were gray beings with the black eye pieces, but they had clawed claws,
mhm.
not fingers with nails, but just claws. But the late great Dr. Carla Turner called chicken claws, right? So they were in my bedroom. They took me up there. There's other things that happened in the bedroom, which I won't go into, that were kind of, disturbing. But then they took me into the ship. It was a very large ship. I remember my head was tilted down and I was either being drugged or being floated. There was a beings on either side of me and one in front of me, and I was being led down this long curving hallway, and eventually they let it led into a big large room, and I was going down the central aisle, and there were like beds or tables or something on either side, and there were people laying on there, right? It wasn't just me. And so they led me to a table and they put me onto it. And then they were making me do these involuntary um, movements, like sitting up, right? And then, or I'd be on my stomach and then I'd be bent back, kind of like this, where my head would be bent very far back, and the heels of my feet would be like banging the back of my head. That's how they were like bending me like this, but nothing was touching me. That was what was odd. They were just making me do this somehow. And there was a being there, kind of like a bluish looking guy. And then there was these smaller, like brown looking beings that were scurrying around. I didn't really catch a good glimpse of them, but there was one being that was standing by the table, and in between grunts, because I was grunting, because it kept making me do these stomach crunches and sit ups. Finally, I blurted out, "Look, what are you doing? Right? What are you doing to me?" And it said, "We're taking your energy," right? Which didn't make sense to me. And then they returned me eventually, and I woke up the next morning. I was a basket case emotionally. I promised my friend David to drop him off at work because his car was in the shop, right? So I said, "Yeah, no problem. I'll pick you up in the morning, and I'll take you to work," right? So that morning, I'm parked in out in front of his house, waiting for him to come out. The night before was his experience, and I was still in a state of shock. And what added to my anxiety and distress was that morning or that day happened to be the day that the street sweeper would come by, right? So they put a circular, a memo to all the houses in the neighborhood to either put their cars in the garage or put them up on the driveway. So my car was literally the only one on the street. All the others were in the garages or they were off to work. So it really made me feel alone, you know. It accentuated these feelings I had of fear and anxiety. Finally, my friend came out, and as he got into my car, the first thing I blurted out was, "I had a horrible nightmare last night," right? And he kept saying, "What happened? What happened?" I just kept saying, "I had a horrible nightmare." I couldn't even explain what happened because it was just too frightening, right? So anyway, eventually I moved to San Diego. Now, that full-blown abduction encounter was the culmination of a series of encounters and UFO sightings. I even had a little gray looking out of my TV at me at one point. All those events after I came back from Germany led up to that experience I just described to you. So eventually I moved to San Diego. I joined the San Diego UFO Society, and then I had a regression from my friend Sean Atlanty, the founder of the San Diego UFO Society. He was a trained hypnotic regressionist. So he put me under. Nothing came out. I thought it was a failed abduction regression. And I was really disappointed, right? I was hoping something, but Barbara Bartley told me years later that you would be very difficult to put under, right? She told me this, but that was much later. But so Sean regressed me. Nothing new came up, and I was really disappointed. Now, a few nights later, I was finishing that book by Dr. Kenneth Ring, Project Omega, uh, OBEs, NDEs, UFOs, and the mind at large. And at the end of that book, there's a questionnaire. And right around question 16 or 17, thereabouts, there was a question that asked, as a young child, did you ever have invisible friends that no one else could see, or words to that effect, right? And the moment I read that question, that childhood experience, when that being was in my room, it all just came into my conscious awareness. Every detail, every moment of the experience. It was like a zip file had opened and all this stuff just came out. So I called my friend. I said, you know that regression you gave me the other day, which I thought was like a failure? Well, guess what? You know, and I told him what had happened. I'd read that question, and then the whole thing came back to my conscious memory. So to get back to your answer, your question rather, my first experience would have been between the ages of 4 and 5 with that brown being, and then intermittently after that, I had a number of other experiences, like a lot of UFO dreams, missing time, nosebleeds. Eventually, we moved from Daly City, which was a suburb of San Francisco. It was right next to San Francisco because my dad was stationed on the aircraft carriers, so USS Coral Sea first, and then the USS Ranger. and they parked them in Alameda. That's the name of the Naval Air Station Alameda. So my dad finished his stint there, and then he knew he was going to be transferred to Naval Air Station Moffett Field, further south, north of San Jose. So in anticipation of that, he bought a house in San Jose, so the commute would be shorter, right? So he would just drive north, 15, 20, 25 minutes, and then he would be at Naval Air Station Moffett. And that's a very spooky place. They have NASA Ames research there. They have the Blue Cube, the National Reconnaissance Office, National Security Agency, satellite tracking facility. They have uh, Lockheed Missile and Space division there, where they build the spy satellites. So there's a lot of really spooky, high security related operations going on there. So from then on, about 74 onwards, we were living in San Jose. And that's where a lot of my experiences happened. A lot of my abduction experiences happened in San Jose. A lot of missing time, a lot of UFO related dreams, a lot of out of body experiences. So that takes me up to about my teen years, like 15, 16, 17, 18 years old. And much more happened after that.
Hmm. When you mentioned you told your friend I had a horrible nightmare, at that particular point in time, were you convinced it was a dream?
No, it was something real
Mm.
because,
But you
well,
said,
I'll tell, yeah. In order for me to be able to digest it, I coached it in terms of it was a nightmare, but it wasn't a nightmare because of what had happened. See, in my bedroom where the three reptilian grays were there, they also brought in this hideous female being. I'm not even going to talk about what it did to me or try to do to me, right? That was part of the nightmare too, right?
Mhm.
Uh, it got on top of me, tried to simulate sex, and it was just,
Mm.
I couldn't even move. It was horrible, right? And then they took me up to the ship, and things, unraveled from there. So, yes, I mean, to me, it was a nightmare, but I knew it was real. Years later, after that experience, right? And that would have been September 1990 when I was still living in San Jose, California. The only thing that I could do to get some sense of control and attain more understanding was to read as much as I could about alien abductions. So there used to be a bookstore chain called B. Dalton's in America back then. And there was a B. Dalton's bookstore at the East Ridge Mall in East Side San Jose. I was in the north side. This was in the east side. So I had to drive like 45 minutes to get there. And long story short, I basically cleaned out all their alien abduction books, every one of them. And the last book that they had that I hadn't read yet was Communion. Now, what was interesting was when Communion first came out, that was Whitley Strieber's first book, and he had the alien on the cover, if you remember, of the book. They had a big display right there in front of B. Dalton's bookstore when it first came out. And I would see that display. I would avoid it. I'd go way over here because I didn't want to see it. There was something about that book cover that terrified me at some deep subconscious level. So I I held off reading that book. I read all these other books, Missing Time, Bud Hopkins, Intruders, by Bud Hopkins, the Andreessen Affair series of books with the Watchers by Raymond Fowler, which is a great book. Finally, there was only one book left, and that was Communion. So I had to buy it and I had to read it. And there, when Whitley Strieber described his first consciously remembered abduction at his upstate New York cabin. And he described how these little beings picked him up and they carried him out of the cabin. And he wrote something to the effect that I knew at this point something was very wrong, right? And I really related to that with what happened in September 1990 because First of all, three aliens show over my bedroom. They bring in this hideous female mutant hybrid or something with black hair or hideous face. And then they take me up to the ship. So when all that was going on, I knew something was wrong because it was more than just a dream. It was physical. They were touching me, they were moving me around. They put me on that table where they kept making me do sit ups and stomach crunches, and it was very painful. Oh, what was interesting was Sean Atlanty, who gave me the regression that I thought was a failure. When I told him what they did to me, they put me on a table and without even touching me, they were making me do all these stomach crunchers and sit-ups and everything. And then the I asked the entity what they were doing, and the entity said, "We're taking your energy." Sean said, because Sean was a Buddhist and he meditated and he did all that stuff, right? He said, "Oh, they must have been activating your chakras to siphon your energy, right?" I didn't even know what chakras were. It was. I didn't
Mm.
even know what the term meant, right? So yeah, that's when I say nightmare, I only said nightmare, not that it wasn't real, that it was real but terrifying, and that's the only way I could keep my sanity at that point was to think of it in terms of a nightmare. But I knew it was real, so that's what compelled me to read all those books about alien abductions.
Mm. You mentioned that your father was in the Navy, and when you listen to, yeah, let's say paranormal experiences, a lot of time you might find that the family has something to do with the military.
Yes,
Do you think that was something in your case as well?
absolutely. And it wasn't just my father; it turned out to be my uncle, who was the younger brother of my mom is the only one left in that family. She had two older sisters and one younger brother. They've all passed away. My mom was the second youngest child, and she's still alive. But her youngest brother was a mystery man. He had access to all the American military bases, Subic Bay Naval Base, Clark Airfield, and all these other bases. And he was extremely well connected too, because I remember when I met him, when I was an adult in 1988, we flew into Manila. And then from there, we made our way to Manila Harbor, where my uncle had arranged for one of the captains of these inter-island steamers, inter-island ferry boats, to take us to Central Philippines, because he was friends with all the people in the harbor. And every time I saw him, this is not an exaggeration. Every time I saw him, he had like a new case of San Miguel beer, a box with 24 San Miguel beers in it. And he would always have one in his hand. Of course, oh, great. Thanks, Uncle. I'll have a beer too. Thank you. And he knew all the captains, right, of all the ships in that harbor. He was extremely well connected. And then I overheard my mom and my Aunt Rose, who was the next one older than my mom, and they were talking about my uncle. They were perplexed that how does he know all these people? How does he get on all these bases? Right? What does he do for a living? Like it was a mystery, man. And then what happened was uh, I was working with a world class psychic, and she told me because she was helping me piece together my alien background, the different ET groups that I'm connected to, etc. And then she said, "Well, it's interesting that there's someone here who says he's your uncle and wants to talk to you, right?" So out of my uncle, she's explaining what my uncle, who's already passed away by now, was telling her, and he was showing her that when he was still alive, when he was younger, he would go into these underground bases, these underground American bases, and see the U.S. military, and he would see aliens too, right? So for whatever reason, the U.S. deep black military, took my uncle into their confidence for whatever reason, and I think there's genetic reasons for that also. because on my mom's side of the family, it's not we're not only Filipino, but our bloodlines go back to the ancient Chinese dragon courts. My grandmother, who I never knew, she passed away before I was born. My mom's mom. If you looked at her, if you looked at a picture of her, a black and white picture, she looks Chinese. Okay. So that's where that bloodline came from. And then on my father's side, he's Filipino, but he also has Portuguese and Spanish, just like my mom's side does, because the Spaniards had colonized the Philippines for so long. They inbred with the natives and they created this oligarchical class called the mestizos and mestizas, i.e., light skinned, offspring, light skinned descendants of the Spaniards, right? So that was on my mom's side, but it was also on my father's side. And my father, so keep that point in mind. My uncle, unbeknownst to me when I was alive, unbeknownst to anybody, he was involved in this deep black underground base alien military operation for whatever reason, right?
Mm.
Because
You
he
call,
felt compelled, yeah,
yeah,
he
go
felt
ahead.
compelled to appear and tell my friend who was doing this reading for me, and she's world class. I'll tell you right now, she's really, really good. And then I found out things about my father, right, towards the end of his life. Now, I already knew that he was part of the Brown Water Navy in Vietnam. Those were the little patrol boats go up and down the Mekong Delta, um, covert operations, inserting, extracting Navy SEALs, Australian Special Air Service, and other operations. But then I found out from my sister, right, that on one occasion, the Navy in those patrol boats had dropped him off in the jungle by himself in a remote part of the jungle for like 2 days.
Hmm.
And it's up in the air what happened to him, if he was subjected to mind control or something, right? All all I learned from it was that after 2 days, another patrol boat arrived with Australian SAS on board. My sister, all she knew was that they were Australians, but she wouldn't have known about the SAS. But I know that they work closely with the Brown Water Navy at times and with the Navy SEALs. So presumably these guys were Australian SAS. They came, they picked up my father from the jungle and they brought him back. Okay. And then what had happened after, uh, my father passed away, I had another reading with my psychic friend, right? And she told me that it turned out that not only did my dad have involvement in covert operations during the Vietnam War, right? But afterwards, they were still like naval intelligence or somebody, most likely naval intelligence, was still using him much against his will. It was a secret he harbored for the rest of his life, and he was very upset about it, but he felt he couldn't do anything about it. And he also said to my psychic friend to tell me that he regretted not being able to do more to protect me, right? Now, consciously, he wouldn't have been, I don't think he would have been aware of what was done to me in the military medical hospitals. Because when I was a young boy, I had a problematic childhood as far as my health was concerned. I think things may have been done to me to make me have poor health,
Hmm.
childhood treatments. Let's just leave it at that, right?
Yeah.
So I had these ill effects, which compelled my parents because they're active duty Navy. My dad, my mom is a Navy wife. Unless it's an emergency, if it's an emergency, they'll take me to the nearest hospital, which they've done before, a civilian hospital when I was a boy. But for like specialist visits for appointments, like every other military dependent, Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, Coast Guard, your parents that are in the military will take you to a military hospital or a military clinic. And that's what happened to me. So a lot of the military naval clinics that I've been to, uh, Balboa Naval Medical Center in San Diego, turned out to be a notorious mind control center. Oak Knoll Naval Hospital near Oakland, California, turned out to be another notorious mind control center. The Presidio Army Letter Army Letterman General Hospital in the Presidio in San Francisco. That's where Michael Aquino used to operate. Another mind control center. I had a missing time experience there, and then also the doctors. And one must understand these doctors, Navy doctors, for example, they would be lieutenant commanders, commanders, and captains. A captain in the Navy is equivalent to a colonel in the Air Force or the Army or the Marines, a very high ranking officer, one rung below a general or an admiral, flag rank, right? My dad was a lowly, uh, you know, enlisted man, petty officer, right? So when a Navy doctor who's a captain in our example says, Mrs. Bartley, you need to give him these pills before you take him to Oak Knoll Naval Hospital, she's just going to do it. She's not going to
Mhm.
ask why, right? So those pills were were sedatives. They would knock me out. And my dad was a notoriously slow driver. He was a very slow driver. So what should have been like about a 45-minute hour trip, because my dad was so slow of a driver, would be like an hour and a half, 2 hours. But I would be drugged out. On one occasion, on the way to Oak Knoll Naval Hospital, I was taken there many times. Have virtually no memory of all the times I was in Oak Knoll. Right. On one occasion, I woke up. You remember those station wagons they had in the old days, right? Uh, Bench seats. The regular seats in the front. In the middle was bench seats, and in the back were bench seats that faced out the rear of the car. Right. Anyway, on one occasion, when my dad was driving us to Oak Knoll Naval Hospital, I came to consciousness. I was laying in the middle bench seat, and I was drugged out. My head was lolling, and I noticed my younger brother, my next younger brother after me, he was laying there unconscious. So they brought both of us and they drugged both of us out, right? So long and short of it was, for a significant period of time when I was a boy, I was being brought to these military medical clinics over and over again. On one occasion, I think it was in Oak Knoll, I woke up in a clinic. It was dark. I can see the red lights on some of the equipment, and I had all these wires stuck in my head, right? And I woke up in bed in a clinic. I don't even know how I got there. And another occasion at Army Letterman General Hospital in the Presidio, my mom took me there. And I must emphasize, my parents were not in on it. They were not part of some cult or mind control operation. They were just obedient, uh, concerned parents whose children, me in particular, were ill. So they did. It's the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It's not the same as, if you're not in the military in America, you have the Bill of Rights. Well, not in the military. You do what you're told. So when the military said, well, take him to this clinic, take him to that clinic, give him these drugs, they're going to do it. That's all they know, right? So on one occasion, my mom took me to Army Letterman General Hospital in the Presidio on a weekend. And we went in there. There was nobody at the front desk. And she must have gotten instructions from somebody. She took me down this corridor. At the very end of the corridor, we got into an elevator, took it up or took it down. I can't remember, but I think probably took it up. And then we got out of the elevator. Then she led me to an office door, and that's all I remember. The next thing I remember, I came to consciousness. I'm inside the office. I'm alone. It's completely dark, and I'm groping along the wall to find either the light switch or find a doorknob. And I finally find the doorknob and I open it, and my mom is waiting right outside. Like perfect timing. right? So I went with her. We took that elevator, went back down, and went home. But I don't know what happened in there. It was missing time. So a lot of that stuff happened when I was a boy, which tells me that based on my bloodline, based on my medical chart, my DNA profile, blood work, etc., which the Navy would have had all access to because I was a Navy dependent. Somewhere along the line, they realized that I'm having these alien encounters. There's something in my genetic profile, my DNA profile, that strongly suggests that I'm having encounters. Not only that, though, but it's quite possible that the aliens that work with elements of the military also tell them this person, this kid, that child. Okay, we work with them, we take them, we operate on them or whatever, right? So all that led up to much later. I started having all these military encounters, not just encounters with reptilians. I'm getting ahead of myself, but once I got to San Diego and started doing a lot of research, I was networking with Barbara Bartholick in Oklahoma and Joyce Spivey in the high desert of Southern California. She's also passed away. She introduced me to a number of my labs in the high desert. Evie Lorgan, of course, I worked closely with her back then. In that process of having recurring alien encounters, reptilian encounters, starting to consciously have reptilian encounters, I began to have military encounters too. And it was only when I thought about it later, well, there has to be a connection with what happened when I was a boy. All those times they kept taking me to these clinics when I was supposedly sick, right? When they were drugging me out and like I'm having all this missing time in these medical clinics. And then years later, I started having all these military encounters with naval intelligence in particular. Yes, it's all connected. And it goes back to my bloodline, my uncle who's passed away, who was involved with the US military in the Philippines in alien programs. My dad involved with covert operations, two tours in the Vietnam War. And unbeknownst to us, he only told this to my psychic friend after he passed away, even after the Vietnam War, when he was working, when he was still in the Navy and then eventually got out of the Navy, was working in the post office. He was still being accessed and used by intelligence. I didn't know all this until he'd passed away. So, anyhow, to answer your question,
Hmm. You mentioned the Australian SAS. Is that a special unit for
Special Air Service, the
special
technical
air service? Okay.
technical term is SASR, Special Air Service Regiment. It's the Australian version of the British Special Air Service,
Ah, okay.
right?
Thank you.
Yeah. So
So,
that's
you called your your uncle the mystery man. Did
yes.
he have a an official job description, regardless if he worked there or not?
He seemed to be some kind of contractor. He seemed to have access to every American military base.
Hmm.
And it was such a curiosity to his sisters, my mom and, his other sisters, that they would talk about it. It's like, how does he know all these people? How does he get on all these bases? Like, how come he knows all these military officers? Now, it's very common. My mom did this too. People to get jobs on the military base, but usually it's like service related. They work in a bowling alley, they work in a laundromat, they work in a restaurant, right? They don't do this weird stuff my uncle did, right?
Hmm.
So, yes, when consider all these different factors, and also the fact that these aliens, especially the negative ones, seem to know when we're coming back into the earthly plane, I'm satisfied at some level the military and these certain alien groups the military is working with were aware of who I was at a very early age. And later, like I said, began having military experiences, began having experiences which I consider were not on this earth. I've had plenty of experiences underground or on the surface in a military installation, but there were times when I was absolutely certain I was not on Earth. I was in a big spaceship that was man-made, not just alien craft, which I've been on before, but on big man-made spaceships, basically, right? So getting around all these people in this full disclosure uh, conference, and then I took part in a panel, right? Two panels, and just hearing all these people talk, even before I had my turn with the microphone, it was bringing up all these memories that uh, I wouldn't say I suppressed them, but I've never really delved into them publicly, right? I mentioned them in some of my interviews and some of my podcast commentaries in the member segment. I would mention some of these things, but very seldom did I ever talk about them, publicly, right?
Mm.
Except for the basic my lab type stuff, but
Yeah.
seldom talk about the off world stuff. But there are other people that have seen me on Mars, people that I trust, right? Uh, excuse me. There's always the danger of find yourself in an echo chamber where everybody's saying, "Oh, I saw you on a spaceship, I saw you in operation," and then they just begin repeating each other's stories, right? And it just expands and expands into infinity. So there's always that danger. But the people that told me that they've seen me in the Stargate room in Mars and other places off world, these are people I've known for a long time that have no reason to lie to themselves, let alone lie to me, right? So when they tell me some of this stuff, I have to I have to take that seriously, right? Because it also aligns with some of my memories too, and it's a whole another topic which I could talk about for a long time about the whole military thing
Yeah.
connection with me.
So as you know, there is a strong belief out there among certain people that, yeah, well, there are no aliens, and what people describe is actually a demonic encounter. What would you tell them?
Well, demons don't need technology, right?
Mm.
Demons don't need spaceships. They don't need handheld devices. They don't need like utility belts with like they can press a button on their belt and they don't have to be high tech. Hey, they don't have to be high tech. Whereas, demons are just demons, basically. I mean, they can mess with machinery, they can do things to your TV and your computer, but they don't need technology to do it, right? They don't need to have a big light ray, fill up your room with a bright light and, take you up into a spaceship, right? And the fact that there have been so many crash retrievals over the decades, over the years, uh, where actual hardware, there's a hardware component to this which they can't explain away. These alloys, metallurgists are baffled a lot of times when they come across some of this technology because a lot of the material is unknown on Earth, right? So they have to expand their understanding about all this. So yes, uh, what I would like to see is a lot of the Christians who know there's a new world order, who know there's a Luciferian agenda. It would be nice if they could catch on to the fact that there's an alien aspect to this as well.
Mm.
The surface level truthers, many of them are like biblical Christians or Christian Zionists. They're caught in this paradigm where, because of their brainwashing and programming, they don't believe aliens exist. It's got nothing to do with having done any research because they haven't done any. Jennifer Bryant was dropping truth bombs on the InfoWars show recently. She was being interviewed by Owen Schroyer, who I like. Owen Schroyer, actually. I think the guy's got a lot of guts. But anyway, Juliet Bryant said she saw Epstein turn into a reptilian,
Hmm.
and also that in that ranch, that Zorro Ranch, whatever it's called in New Mexico, they were doing genetic experiments on her and doing other things. And there's an underground base there. See, and all the surface level types can do is chirp. I want to see the Epstein list. I want to see the Epstein. Wait a minute, right? What about this person who was actually there, victimized, trafficked, saying that Epstein shapeshifted into a reptilian right in front of her, right? And when I look at Epstein's facial structure, he looks like a reptilian. Absolutely, he does. and also little known facets about his anatomy. A number of the survivors of Epstein Island and the ranch in New Mexico and other places they've been trafficked to, they say there's something different about Epstein's penis. And that makes absolute sense because the reptilians, the real physical reptilians, their penises are kind of like in a housing, similar to a dog's, where it only extends, sticks out when they need it to, right? Otherwise, it's kind of hidden. And so I haven't got the details of what exactly Epstein's looks like, but the fact that more than one witness said there's something completely different about his penis, that makes absolute sense from a reptilian shapeshifting perspective. That's a little known nuanced fact, data point that I can't ignore as an investigator.
Yeah, I saw that video clip when he was asked in court about it.
Yes, the
And
deposition. Yes,
yeah, he tried to laugh it off, but yeah, it was important enough that the court asked. Yeah,
yes.
yeah. So, to your best knowledge, has anybody figured out what exactly they are after in terms of genetics, DNA? What exactly is it that triggers these encounters?
This is just me making an intuitive, educated guess. Let's say
Mhm.
hypothesis. It's not only the DNA and the latent metaphysical powers in the DNA of certain bloodlines, certain abductee family trees, but also to do with the soul, right? These beings, some of them anyway, they seem to have an abiding interest in the human soul. And we know that they have like captured souls. The globe shaped, spherical shaped craft, Barbara Bartley used to call them the soul depositories because when they abduct people or when like there's a war or some other catastrophe has gone on and been a lot of death, these big globe shaped ships show up either visibly or invisibly, and they tend to suck up a lot of the souls of the recently departed, right? So it's not only that they're interested in our bodies and our DNA for purposes from the standpoint of certain ET groups for their hybridization program, like these grays, for example, they've reached the end of their evolutionary tether. They've gone as far as they can go through cloning and genetic engineering. So they're taking our DNA and upgrading themselves, right? They're trying to create this hybrid race between us and them so they can continue. Because what they do is they transfer their consciousness from like a dying gray body into a new gray body. They just do this endlessly and repeat it over and over and over. But they've still reached the end of their evolution, right? So that's one reason. Not all the ET groups have the same agenda exactly, but it does seem to be tied in with the reincarnation soul trap. When people die in on this world, they get recycled and then they wind up being born again, reincarnated, right? And when they come back, often as not, the world is more controlled, it's more oppressed, it's more tyrannical. The regimes are more tyrannical. It just gets worse and worse every time we come back. And now I think they've reached this point where, because of the onset of these celestially driven cataclysms, which I've been talking about for years now, they just had a huge earthquake swarm in America around this formerly dormant volcano, right? And I think that has everything to do with Planet X, Nemesis, Nibiru, call it what one will. There is another mini solar system in our solar system now, and it's having manifold effects on Earth and probably other planets too. So we're having way more seismic activity. Volcanoes are going off all over the place. So even if they didn't do this rollout the last several years, all the treatment, so-called, right? And made tremendous inroads into culling the surface population of the human race. Even if they didn't do that, there'd be a massive reset because of these earth changes that are coming along, which they're just calling climate change, right? So there's going to be like a big culling of what's left of the surface population. What I would like to do, or what I would like to see rather, is, well, no matter what happens, let's not get stuck into the cycle of reincarnation anymore, right? If some of us had lives in other star systems in our galaxy, Orion or the Pleiades or somewhere else, well, why next time, why don't we incarnate over there? Why do we have to keep incarnating here over and over and over again, right? So what they've done with this reincarnation system is, and I know there's a lot of people that take exception to the concept of a soul reincarnational uh, trap, prison matrix, if you will, uh, and they're free to think whatever they want about this, right? But it seems to me that this soul reincarnation recycling agenda is a big part of this, and because they know these earth changes are coming back, they want to set things up to be able to take as many souls as possible. And the ones that are still living on the surface, they want to plug them into this kind of Borg collective. I mean, just think of all the people on the surface right now who have an active nanotech operating system inside of them right now, right? Who would have thought that was going to happen, right? So, uh, yeah, it's got to do with consciousness, the soul, our DNA, and this very much is a controlled paradigm. It needs to be dismantled.
Hmm. Yeah. So we have reached the top of the hour, and this was the public hour, and we will see the patrons on the other side.